Today I want to talk to you about the cons of working in utilization review. If you didn't catch my last video on the pros of working in utilization review, please check that out. I'll put the link in the description. If you don't know who I am, my name is Philip McGee. I'm a physical therapist who works full-time in utilization review as a pre-service coordinator, and I wanted to provide a balanced look on the pros and cons of working in utilization review. I know for myself, when I was applying for different jobs, I really found either people had nothing but positive things to say or they had nothing but negative things to say. And I wanted to provide a balanced look at that. So in my first video, I talked about the top 4 pros of working in utilization review, and now I want to talk about 4 cons of working in utilization review. The first one that we'll talk about is giving bad news. Now, I didn't realize how much bad news I would honestly have to provide. When I heard about utilization review, my thought was that I was mostly going to be reviewing charts and helping to make decisions, but I also didn't realize that part of my role would be calling and telling people the bad news about denials. Now, that depends on what utilization review company you work for and what role you have, but I would say overall, utilization review is going to be telling people whether or not they're receiving something that's medically necessary, whether that's utilization review in a hospital setting or whether that's, like myself, reviewing inpatient rehab authorization requests. And unfortunately, in my role, it's pretty strict. There's guidelines under CMS Chapter 1 that have real specific requirements for what is appropriate for inpatient rehab admission. And so I end up having to spend a lot of my day giving bad news, or even if they know who I am or they know what my role is, they know that I'm usually not going to be providing good news. Now, how do I handle that when it comes to taking on this role? I realize that any job that you take for instance, the last job that I had working in home health, I oftentimes had to give patients that I worked with bad news, that I had to tell them either they were no longer making progress, that they no longer had a skilled physical therapy need and they needed to be discharged. And there were a lot of times that I wasn't making people happy by giving them that news. And so I realized that in any job, you're either going to make someone unhappy, whether that's your boss or it's going to be a patient if you're working in healthcare. And so I realized it's just part of the job. Now, the worst aspect of giving the bad news is if you have people that are upset at you, and then there's a lot of customer service that you just have to implement and learn, because you're going to have to handle a lot of calls that may be abrasive, that people either are upset with the decision that was made or you are having to calm someone down about the length of time that it took to get a decision. There's all sorts of different variables as to why people are upset, but it is something that is part of the role. I know in other roles in utilization review, there are people that are having to tell family members or patients how long of a length of stay that they have, and people don't take that very well. One of the other things that helps me to feel okay with giving bad news is, along with giving bad news, I do tell people that they do have the right to appeal, and I do think that's something that is underutilized, that people don't realize that they have those rights. Under Medicare Advantage plans, people are able to take up to 5 levels of appeal, and I think unfortunately people don't either realize that or they dismiss it and don't see that as an option. And I always take comfort in knowing that I'm not providing the final decision and they have no other options after that, I do provide other options. But do know that in utilization review, people oftentimes, especially other clinicians, aren't seeing you as the good guy. You're oftentimes viewed as the bad guy. The second part that I didn't realize in utilization review is how much multitasking I would have to do. And a lot of that has to do with being in what we call the phone queue, that there's all sorts of different calls that are coming throughout the United States. And oftentimes you're reviewing a case, you're reading the clinicals, reading the medical records, and then all of a sudden there's a phone call that comes in. And in that phone call, you're having to stop what you're doing, switch tasks, and review something else that's going on because somebody else has another question and you need to be able to help provide answers for those questions. And so I didn't realize that there was going to be this jumping back and forth between different tasks. It's something that I've learned to adapt to, but as someone who in home health, you had one task and you stuck with that task, you didn't have to try to orchestrate multiple different tasks at the same time. It was a bit of a challenge. I will say that it is something that you do learn and you start to realize how you can be efficient, but it was something that really wasn't explicitly stated to me, or at least I didn't perceive it as explicitly stated, that I would have to do that much multitasking. But it is a con if you're someone who wants to have a regimented process and nothing that stops you from doing that. That can be a con. The third would be physical inactivity. My job is 100% remote, and so I spend my job at my desk. Now, fortunately, I do have a standing desk, and I also do have a QB, which, if you're not familiar, QB is this under the desk elliptical, and I bought it years ago when it actually first came out. But it's something that, unless you're having a treadmill desk, or you have something like a QB or a respirator, pedals, something to keep you physically active, you could very easily just sit in your chair for the 8 hours that you're working and have horrible posture and just be incredibly inactive, not do any sort of exercise, and that isn't healthy. And it's something that, if you're used to being in healthcare, walking around, even if you're just doing minimal physical activity, it's going to be a lot more in your clinical role than it is in your non-clinical role in utilization review, unless you are intentional about the physical activity. So I know when I first started, I wanted to be very intentional, and I made sure that I did the QB for at least a few hours, even though it was very light. I was trying to make sure that I was getting some physical activity. And then when I went to go to my in-laws to work, I didn't have that, and I just sat at a desk, a traditional desk, not a standing desk, and very much missed my standing desk, because you end up just oftentimes sitting in one place, and you have to make sure that you're thinking about getting up, moving around, stretching, so that you're not just staying in one position. So physical inactivity, it can be a con, and you just, if you're going to go into the role, know that you need to make efforts to not just stay in one place. The last con that I'll talk about is that, compared to some settings, utilization review can have a lower salary. Now, that really depends on how many years you've been working and what setting you're coming from, because I do know people that it was actually a pay increase going into utilization review. I'll speak for myself, coming from home health. Home health is one of the better paying settings when it comes to physical therapy. And it was something that I had to discuss with my wife, and had to take a look at all the numbers to decide, is this something that we can really do financially? So in home health, I was making 6 figures. In utilization review, they say that the average is somewhere between the mid 70,000s to the mid 80,000s. I would say my experience from hearing other people and reading different things, it tends to be in the upper 70,000s to lower 80,000 starting out. But some things to consider is that you have other benefits that I know for myself. My healthcare coverage was dramatically cheaper going into utilization review compared to my home health job. And I had a lot of other benefits that made my take-home pay not that dramatic of a pay cut. So in all, it looked like, just taking the numbers of salary, it was going to be about a 20% pay cut. But then when I looked at all the benefits and how much money I was taking home after all of the benefits were taken into account, it ended up being about a 5 to 10% pay cut, at least starting out. And so I know I've been asked, is it really worth it? And to me, it is absolutely worth it, because I just have, as I mentioned, the pros, I just have a set schedule and I don't have to work multiple hours and spend time documenting later in the evening. And it's also where I have other opportunities to make other sources of income, and ideally make passive income. I've mentioned in the previous video and in the video before that that I have created a utilization review course. And so that course is something that I wouldn't have been able to create if I was a clinician, just because I wouldn't have even had the time to do that. But also, I think that there's other avenues of having income. I think people tend to just focus on their sole salary and they don't think of other streams of revenue. And if anything I learned from the pandemic is that your primary source of income can be taken away very quickly. And I knew lots of therapists that were furloughed when COVID first started in 2020, and it just happened instantly and there was no warning. And so I think in this role, I have a lot more opportunities. I have a lot more safety in terms of uh, having different sources of income other than just my salary. So it is something to take into account. I don't think that's something to take lightly, that I think you do need to make sure that you get paid what you believe is fair. But I think you also need to consider that it's not just your salary that is the key component of why you should take a job or not. So I hope providing both the pros and the cons helps you to see whether utilization review is even a good fit for you. And I hope that if it is something that is a good fit, I mentioned that I do have a utilization review course called Nonclinical Utilization Review. I also have interview preps and resume reviews, that if that's something that you're interested in, that I do provide those, and I will provide a link in the description. Also, if you are wanting to have the free ebook, I do have an ebook on how to write non-clinical resumes that get job interviews, going over the common errors that I've seen in the resumes that I've reviewed. So if you have found this helpful, I would appreciate it if you hit the like button and you subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video.